Good evening, barflies and lounge lizards, and welcome to the Wacky World Lounge. I'm your host, the Dollar Store Dean Martin, Mr. R.S. Sterling. And tonight we'll be taking a look at my favorite 1950s sci-fi monsters. And number 5 on the list is the sea monster from The Monster from Piedras Blancas from 1959. And I probably mispronounced that, because I forgot how they pronounced it in the film. But The Monster from Piedras Blancas tells the story of a small coastal town that begins experiencing a series of unexplained murders. A pair of scientists and the local sheriff soon discover a creature from the Black Lagoon-inspired prehistoric monster. A monster of which had been lurking around for a decade or so thanks to the lighthouse keeper who had been feeding it, as anyone would do in his situation. As mentioned, the monster was clearly inspired by the creature and certainly looks like the creature's B-movie cousin, but there is certainly a charm to our sea monster here, and it makes sense. Producer Jack Cavan, who created the monster's costume, had worked at Universal and supervised the actual creation of the creature from the Black Lagoon suit, as well as worked on the Mole People costumes from the Mole People. Speaking of Universal monsters, the monster here could be thought of as a Frankenstein's monster of Universal monsters. Molds for both the Mole People and the Metaluda mutant were used in its creation, those molds being the hands and feet. The monster was played by stuntman and actor Pete Dunne, who was in quite a few westerns as well as the original Invaders from Mars as a mutant. An official sequel never happened for the film, but our buddy here did show up again. Sorta. The suit was reused in a 1965 episode of Flipper called Flipper's Monster. In it, a monster movie is being shot in Florida, and this episode was directed by none other than Rico Browning, the swimming version of the creature from the Black Lagoon. And number 4 on the list is the Teenage Monster from I Was a Teenage Frankenstein from the incredible year of 1957. And I Was a Teenage Frankenstein tells the story of the then contemporary Professor Frankenstein, who, in usual Frankenstein fashion, has a pet alligator and creates a monster. Only this time, it's a teenage monster. A monster of which the good Professor Frankenstein uses for his deadly purposes. This is one of my all-time favorite Frankenstein's monster designs. Top 5 easily. Certainly the most gruesome. And physically fit. Talk about a design that is just begging for a Mego figure. As to who actually designed the teen monster, information was extremely scarce, but the makeup artist for the film was Philip Shear. Shear worked on numerous genre pictures including Attack of the Puppet People, I Was a Teenage Werewolf, and Invisible Invaders. But back to our teenage monster. He was played by Gary Conway of Land of the Giants and American Ninja 2 fame. Conway would go on to play the teenage monster again, sorta, in the follow-up How to Make a Monster. You see, I Was a Teenage Frankenstein is part of a unique little shared universe. It began with I Was a Teenage Werewolf starring Michael Landon. Because of that film's success, I Was a Teenage Frankenstein followed just 5 months later. The two films were seemingly unconnected other than their similar titles, but then in 1958 came How to Make a Monster, a follow-up to both teenage monster films. Only in this one, the teen monsters are simply movie characters who are, in a way, brought to life by a disgruntled makeup artist who has been fired from the movie studio. It was a truly unique way to go about a crossover film. But, long story short, Gary Conway returned to the role, this time playing an actor who becomes the teenage monster. And since trivia is so light on the teenage monster, I did want to mention that in the home of the makeup artist from How to Make a Monster, we see several props created by the great Paul Blaisdell, including the mask from Invasion of the Saucermen and the she-creature. Sadly and mind-bogglingly, Blaisdell actually allowed most of these pieces to be destroyed, one of which he built for the sole purpose of burning. Somehow, though, the she-creature mask survived. Yet the one piece he specifically requested not to be burned, the Catgirl mask, was in fact set ablaze. And number 3 on the list is the Reptilian Monster from The Hideous Sun Demon from 1958. And The Hideous Sun Demon tells the classic story, as first told by Shakespeare, of an atomic research scientist who is exposed to a deadly amount of radiation. And now, every time he's exposed to the sun, he turns into a lizard-like monster with an urge to kill, as actually happens in these cases. I've often said, and anyone that follows my Twitter can probably attest, that this movie is really unfairly titled, because I actually think he's pretty darn good looking for a sun demon. Fantastic design that manages to be both frightening and charming all at once. That's probably from his unbuttoned shirt, and he wears pants, so there's that. And he was designed by production designer Richard Casarino under the alias of Ben Sereno, and cost about $500 1950s to make. Casarino also designed another of my favorite movie monsters, the sea creature from Destination Inner Space from 1966. The Sun Demon costume, which was built over a diver's wetsuit, was apparently very hot and uncomfortable for the film's lead, Robert Clark. And yep, Clark actually wore the costume and performed his own stunts. Not to mention, he produced, directed, and co-wrote the film. A man of many talents, many of you are probably well familiar with his roles from The Man from Planet X, The Astounding She-Monster, and From Earth to the Moon. And one last little tidbit about Clark. His son, Cam Clark, is a well-known voice actor, lending his talents to some truly iconic characters, including Leonardo from the 1987 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series, and He-Man from the 2000X Masters of the Universe series. But back to our not-so-hideous topic of discussion, and much like the Teenage Frankenstein, the Sun Demon would return. Sorta. In 1965, a student filmmaker by the name of Donald F. Glut would make a short film called Wrath of the Sun Demon, which starred channel regular Bob Burns, who just happened to own the original mask. Glut, or Glut, would go on to have an impressive career as a writer, including both books on dinosaurs and comic books, writing for Charlton, Warren, Gold Key, and even Archie. And on that, we should take a break.
Darn it, stiff spray. I need a miracle.
Alberto heard you. Out, stiffness. Now I spray upon your hair a fine hairspray that isn't there. A flexible hold a brush can go through. That's the miracle of Nitrile D. Now an Alberto VO5 hairspray.
A flexible hold a brush can go through. Thank goodness he left the VO5 hairspray.
And we're back with number 2 on the list, and that's the sea creature, aka Cuddles, from The She Creature from 1956. And the She Creature, not to be confused with the Astounding She-Monster, tells the story of a powerful hypnotist who, through the act of hypno-regression, transforms a young lady into the form of her past life. A past life which just happens to be a prehistoric humanoid sea monster. And with this sea creature, she creature, the hypnotist gets up to some not so nice things. The she creature, aka Cuddles, is absolutely one of the coolest looking monsters in the 1950s. She's big and imposing and looks like a mix of sea monster, demon, and alien. It's unclear though what her actual color is. Most promotional images and collectibles show her in green, yet she is red on the movie poster and light red on what looks like a lobby card. She was designed by the great Paul Blaisdell, who I previously talked about 2 entries back. More on that later. But Blaisdell created monster suits for a great number of genre pictures, including It Conquered the World, From Hell It Came, Invasion of the Saucermen, The Beast with a Million Eyes, and It, The Terror from Beyond Space. He was also the suit actor in many of the films he worked on, including The She Creature, of which he nicknamed Cuddles. And Cuddles would go on to be used in 2 different AIP films, Voodoo Woman and The Ghost of Dragship Hollow. She wasn't the easiest costume to wear though. The suit got so waterlogged at one point that Blaisdell had a really hard time emerging from the ocean. And now, jumping all the way back to the distant past and when I discovered how to make a monster in the fire that destroyed everything but the she creature mask, well, unfortunately, Cuddles would end up meeting her own unusual end in 1979, when the full costume was destroyed in a flood that hit Blaisdell's Topanga Canyon home. And now for an honorable mention, which is easily my favorite 1950s sci-fi monster, and that's the Creatures from the Black Lagoon, but I knew there would be no way I'd be able to get away with using the footage. And number 1 on the list, the Mutant Moles from the Mole People, also from 1956. And The Mole People tells the story of a group of archaeologists who, after an earthquake, discover an ancient civilization living deep underground. And these underground dwellers just happen to keep mutant mole people as slaves to harvest mushrooms, their primary food source. But wouldn't you know, our buddies the mole people end up rebelling. I have always been a big fan of the design of the mole people, and that goes way back to when I was just a wee lad and saw a picture of the 1984 Horizon model kit in a photocopied black and white catalog I ordered from the back of a magazine. This iconic design came from Jack Cavan, who, as I mentioned in Entry 5, would go on to reuse the mole people's hands for the monster of still mispronounced Piedras Blancas. Kevin, probably Cavan, also worked on Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, Monster on Campus, and a little film known as The Wizard of Oz. Cavan didn't have a lot to work with budget-wise for the Mole People, even though it was a Universal film. Universal even vetoed the construction of the humps for the Mole People's backs because of the cost. So in order to cut cost and keep the effect, Cavan wadded up newspaper and shoved it under the actors' suit jackets. This worked out pretty well, though according to director Virgil Vogel, when filming the big battle scene, everything looked great, until they noticed there was newspaper all over the ground. It had fallen out of the actors' jackets during the action. So for the next take, they taped the humps in, and all was right in the underground world. As to suit actors, there were of course several, being that there were several mole people, but one in particular was actor and stuntman Bob Heron, who was also a Martian in the original Invaders from Mars, a slime person in the Slime People, but most importantly, the Klingon Callus from Star Trek. The mole people would return as well, sorta, and not just their hands. Footage of the mutant moles would be used in The Wild World of the Batwoman by Jerry Warren. Sorry, Tony. And that's all the time we have for this week. Please like, comment, subscribe, and keep it wacky.
New from RCA Victor. Handiest TV set ever built. RCA Victor Personal TV. Light enough to take anywhere.
Wonderful. What's that?
A detachable stand. Tilts for easy viewing.
How's the picture?
Sharp, clear. It's RCA Victor picture quality.
Where's the antenna?
It's hiding here. And there's even a connection for an outside antenna if needed. Make RCA Victor's new personal TV your very own set. Keep it in your bedroom. Watch the shows you want to see. Or use it in your office. Watch important newscasts, ball games. In your kitchen, anywhere in your home. Also ideal as a second set.
What's it cost?
Lowest priced RCA Victor ever. Only $125 in 3 modern colors. Pick it up at your RCA Victor dealer.